It was the morning of July 3, 2012. Most of America was still asleep, dreaming of barbecues and fireworks. But in a quiet coastal town in North Carolina, the phone calls had already started. Andy Griffith was gone. And before most people had even heard the news, he was already in the ground. No announcement. No public viewing. No national farewell for one of the most beloved men in American history. By the time the sun went down that evening, the man who had made an entire country feel safe and warm and whole, had vanished from this world as silently as a summer evening in Mayberry. And people didn't know what to do with that. Fans who had grown up watching him, who had spent their childhood sitting in front of the television, believing in the world he created, were left standing with nowhere to go. No moment to share. No way to say goodbye. Just an empty space where something irreplaceable used to be. The question started almost immediately. Why so fast? What really happened in those final hours? Was something being kept from the public? Because this wasn't just a celebrity. This was Andy Griffith. And the story of why he left this world the way he did, is far more emotional, far more deliberate, and far more heartbreaking than most people ever knew. To understand why his death hit so differently, you have to understand what Andy Griffith actually meant to America. He wasn't just an actor. He was a feeling. Born in 1926 in Mount Airy, North Carolina, a small town so modest it barely showed up on a map, Andy Griffith grew up with almost nothing. Simple home. Simple life. But from the very beginning, something about him was different. He had a warmth that couldn't be manufactured. A slow, easy charm that made strangers feel like old friends. A voice that sounded like a front porch and a glass of sweet tea on a summer afternoon. He clawed his way up from nothing. Local plays. Teaching school. Comedy monologues performed wherever anyone would listen. Slowly, quietly, a reputation started to build. Then Broadway. Then Hollywood. And then, in 1960, everything changed. The Andy Griffith Show arrived on American television and immediately became something more than entertainment. For 8 seasons, Andy played Sheriff Andy Taylor, a widowed father, steady and wise and gentle, raising his boy Opie in the small fictional town of Mayberry. The show was wholesome without being preachy. Funny without ever being cruel. Heartfelt in a way that felt effortless. America didn't just watch it. They lived inside it. Andy Griffith became a symbol, of simpler times, of decency, of the version of life people wanted to believe was still possible somewhere. His face became one of the most recognizable in the country. His name became shorthand for goodness itself. But here's what the cameras never showed. Behind that warm, easy smile, the man was carrying weight that would have broken most people. His first marriage, nearly 30 years, ended in divorce. And then, in 1996, something happened that no amount of fame or success could soften. His adopted son, Andy Samuel Griffith Jr., the boy he had raised and loved, died from alcohol-related liver disease. He was only 38 years old. Andy Griffith sat there in silence after that loss, and something inside him never fully came back. Friends who spent time with him in his later years said the grief never left his eyes. It just lived there, quiet and permanent, underneath the warmth he still showed the world. And the health battles had been real for years. Guillain-Barré syndrome in the 1980s. Heart bypass surgery. A body that had quietly been fighting for decades while the man inside it kept smiling for the cameras. But what happened next changed everything about how his final chapter would unfold. By the time Andy Griffith reached his final decade, he had made a deliberate choice to disappear. He had remarried in 1983, a woman named Cindy Knight, who became, by all accounts, the anchor of his life. Steady. Devoted. The kind of presence that kept a tired man standing. Together, they had retreated to Roanoke Island, off the coast of North Carolina. A quiet life. A private one. He stopped giving interviews. He turned down public appearances, even generous, flattering ones. He skipped Hollywood events entirely. People assumed it was simply old age. An 80-year-old man choosing peace over chaos. That made sense on the surface. But those closest to him knew the truth ran deeper. Andy Griffith's heart was deteriorating. There had been serious health episodes that never made the news, frightening moments that quietly told his family what was coming. And through all of it, his mind remained sharp. His wishes were crystal clear. He knew exactly what he did not want. He had watched too many celebrity funerals in his lifetime. He had seen grief become televised theater, packaged, performed, sold back to the public as content. He had watched dignity get stripped from people in their most vulnerable moments, and he refused to let that happen to him. So he made his arrangements. Quietly. Deliberately. He wanted to be buried on his own land. The land he loved. Near the water he had stared out at during the years when the world finally left him alone. And he wanted it done fast. Private. Final. On July 3, 2012, Andy Griffith passed away from a heart attack at his home in Manteo, North Carolina. He was 86 years old. Within 5 hours of his death being confirmed, he was in the ground. 5 hours. No viewing. No public ceremony. Just his wife Cindy, a small circle of family, and the land that had been his last true home. When the news broke to the rest of the country, the reaction was immediate. And complicated. That's when things took a shocking turn, because not everyone was willing to accept the official explanation. The rumors started before the sun had even set on the day he died. Online, speculation was spreading fast. Some people claimed the rapid burial was suspicious. Conspiracy theories multiplied by the hour, whispers of cover-ups, of secrets, of things being deliberately hidden from the public. It was the kind of darkness that always follows a sudden, private death when the internet gets involved. Ugly. Relentless. Completely detached from reality. But underneath all of that noise, there was something genuine. Something real. A grief that had nowhere to land. For millions of Americans. Especially the generations who had grown up watching Mayberry on their family television sets, Andy Griffith wasn't just a person. He was a childhood memory. He was Saturday nights with parents who were still alive. He was the feeling that the world was safe and knowable and good. And when he died, something that had lived inside people for decades died with him. The lack of a public farewell left a wound that had no ceremony to close it. Ron Howard, little Opie Taylor, now a grown man and one of Hollywood's most celebrated directors, came forward and paid tribute with visible emotion, calling Griffith the defining father figure of his formative years. Don Knotts, his real-life best friend and beloved co-star, had already been gone since 2006. But those who remained from that Mayberry world stepped forward to honor the man who had made them who they were. President Obama released a statement. Flags across North Carolina flew at half-staff. But for Cindy Griffith, all of that was secondary. She had honored her husband's final wish. Completely. Without compromise. And to her, that mattered infinitely more than any tribute the world could offer. Still, one question kept circling back. Was there something more to this? Something beyond a simple wish for privacy? The truth was even more surprising than most people ever realized. Here is what the people closest to Andy Griffith have quietly shared over the years, through interviews, through memoirs, through the careful words of those who actually knew him. Andy Griffith spent his final years in peace. Real peace. But also in real pain. The loss of his son had never left him. The physical toll of a lifetime of health battles was cumulative and undeniable. And Andy, being the deeply self-aware, deeply intentional man he had always been, had made a choice about how his story would end. He did not want his death to become content. Think about what that means. This was a man who had given 60 years of himself to the public. His voice. His image. His talent. His time. He had handed America a version of itself it desperately wanted to believe in, and he had done it with grace and generosity for longer than most careers even last. And in the very end, he decided that this one final moment belonged to him. And to Cindy. And to no one else. There were practical reasons behind the S.